Hello, everyone. Welcome to Author Nation Interviews. Today, we are diving into how to tell your own crime story, where we'll explore dealing with the trauma of retelling and working through on healing, like through your story, and much more. I am your host, Melody Ann Owen, and I'm here to guide you towards actionable insights and strategies that will not only help your writing, but also connect with your readers on a deeper level. Because at Author Nation, we're committed to equipping you with the tools, the inspiration, and the community you need to become a successful nonfiction authors. And with that, I like to tell you about these wonderful treasure trove of resources at authornation.online that is flying past you below as well. Go check that out. Okay, so whether you're sipping on your morning coffee or winding down after a long day, settle in as we explore how understanding your own story can transform your writing and your ability to share your story with the world. Let's introduce our guest. Lenore Rattray is a storyteller, trauma survivor, writer, speaker, and community builder with a passion for sharing her personal understanding of post-traumatic growth, as well as her story of living with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. In her podcast, Stand Up 8, she shares her story of surviving a crime. It's a true crime from a survivor's perspective. The crime she survived was a robbery, kidnapping, and assault that happened in British Columbia, Canada in 1992. And until now, she has never told her side. Let's welcome Lenore. Hi, Lenore. How are you today?
Hi, Melody. I'm good. Thank you.
Good, good. Let's start off. Just tell us about your podcast, Stand Up 8. Why did you decide to share your story now?
I guess the short answer to why now is really to do with my health. It got to a point about 8 years ago where I became very sick. And through going to various doctors, I was having stroke symptoms, I was having heart attack symptoms, cancer symptoms. I was just a mess. And it wasn't until I saw a psychologist that introduced the concept of PTSD, which I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of trust in the systems at that point, and PTSD seemed like a very far-fetched diagnosis, but ultimately, by keeping the story inside, it was making me sick. And
Yeah.
the PTSD journey and the storytelling journey to myself first, I really realized the power of the connection between your mental and your physical health.
Yeah, exactly. And so at that time, did you do some kind of work with a psychologist or a therapist of some sort before you started the podcast?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. The writing this story in particular began as a therapeutic tool. And in the PTSD therapies that I was led through, they're very similar to well, it was the same format that you would give to war vets. And it seemed a little extreme, I'm not gonna lie, when he was launching into it. I really didn't understand the relevance to what I was carrying, but have learned so much through that process. And in the initial writing, yes, it was painful, it was challenging, and it's been quite a long road, but eventually it led into a bigger picture, um, a bigger picture impact that I'm hoping the story will have in its release.
Yeah. And so PTSD was not a thing until after the war. And vets came home with all these issues. And that's actually where people realized, oh, there's this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm not surprised that they're still using the same model, really, for telling the story, right? It's as much as maybe there's a better way, I don't know, but that makes sense. So after that, you started retelling your story for the podcast. Now, how is it different? Like, these are two different retellings, right? One is a private attempt to understand and maybe not fully heal, but get on that healing path. And the other is public. For the public, it's forward facing. It's people facing. How are those two different?
Well, for me personally, it's been the road in how best I heal, and I best heal through storytelling, through writing. So typical PTSD therapies were more of a verbal format, and I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't do it. It took me to too much of a dark place, and it was through the writing that it got it out. So the road to leading up to the podcast, the difference in that is extreme night and day. I knew I wanted to tell this in some way that wasn't, I'd always struggled with the way true crime was presented. And I'm not anti true crime in any way, but I think, especially when you've spent 9 days with somebody who is extremely mentally unwell, psychotic individual, you get to know what makes them tick. And the fact that we are putting these people on kind of a pedestal as a survivor, I saw how it fed the person that had me and how it would feed him. So, but back to your question, the process, it started as therapy. It got me into writing. I attended, there's a major writing conference here called the Surrey International Writers Conference, which is for writers, the mecca to go to in terms of connections and education and pitch opportunities. So I've been going there religiously, and I met my writing mentor there. And his background is with CBC Radio, and he's also a published author of his own memoir. So with those combined backgrounds, he started to mentor me. He saw the power of the story from a news side, but he also saw it from the memoir therapy side. And that's ultimately what led to the podcast, because it is such a complicated story from a vulnerability side, and also just all of the detail in it. And he liked how I told it as opposed to how I wrote it. So he said, let's create the book in an auditory. And that's really where it, how it developed.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. For the audience out there, for you guys listening, you're probably wondering, what is this story? So there is a link in the show notes. There's a link below that you can go click on to get more of the details around the story. We're not going to get into the details of the story. This is actually not a true crime show. We're not going to get into those. But if you are interested in understanding, this episode by understanding the story, I encourage you to go check that out. All right. So, were there moments in developing the podcast where it just became so overwhelming? And what did you do about that?
Good question. I'd have to say yes. Short answer is yes, there were moments, definitely. Retelling this in any way, shape, or form, you give a piece of yourself whenever you speak or you write, or especially if it's a vulnerable story, but as a creative outlet in general, I believe you give a piece of yourself. And for me, I wasn't able to stick to strict guidelines. I had to work at my own pace. I know I know pretty well where I'm going to hit my own walls and roadblocks. And that stalled things along the way. But having the right resources, mentorship. JJ is his name, the one who's mentored me and really produced and engineered this whole outlet. Having that was really the main push that kept me moving forward. But yeah, I mean, definitely, there were times where, well, not just even going back in my own mind. I'm lucky that the fact that it was a crime and it was in the court system and it was documented, and I have copies of statements and police reports and all of that kind of stuff. Going back through that, I needed to take a day or so. Sometimes. Yeah. You gotta, I mean, you yourself, you've got to know it. But yet in the long run, it was powerful for me, but it was my
Yeah.
choice to do.
Yeah. So it sounds like, when it gets overwhelming, slow down, take your time, and have support, because you have a person you can talk to, or maybe persons you can talk to.
Yes.
So you describe your podcast as not just a survival guide, but a window into the long-term effects of trauma. So how do you balance sharing such a deeply personal experience, but also creating a narrative that listeners want to listen to and can relate to?
The balance between sharing something, a deep experience, and the narrative. Yes, well, I guess that's really where the taking themes, attaching a theme to each episode became key in telling it. Because if I just told it day one, day two, day three, and so on, it's convoluted, and the point is lost in the detail, in the I guess the ugliness or the salacious content. So what we did, JJ had pushed me to look at it as a self-help. What tips and tricks can you communicate that helped you survive? And I thought, it's too big. I mean, because every situation is unique. But what to answer your question, what did help is looking at it and saying, okay, um, going through the days and going through, how did I stay alive? And looking at more attributes and behaviors that we have in our human condition that we possess, um, and then theming the episodes on that and telling the stories surrounding that. And that made it make sense, and it made it flow. And there's a lot of growth that's come out of that in terms of other things I can share and present. So
Yeah, thank you. So you talk about 8 key attributes that helped you survive the ordeal. Could you just start by naming them, and then maybe we could dive into one or two of them?
sure. Well, it was naivety, adaptability, compliance, shutting down, storytelling, human connection, choice, and I think I'm missing one in there.
Is that faith?
Faith. Yes.
Yeah, faith. Beautiful. Thank you. So if you're listening in and you want to, and I really recommend, go listen to Lenore's podcast. You can find it on Apple. The link is there for you. It's in the show notes. Pop down, subscribe to her podcast, and listen in, because I love what Lenore's just said about, it's not just about the narrative and telling the story, but it's bringing in, the key attributes, the survival tips, the what to when, right? And actually, I think that's why a lot of people listen to true crime. What would I do if, right? And so, go check that out, subscribe, and yeah, listen to the entire story. So could you tell us a little bit about, let's talk about shutting down. Can we talk about shutting down just a little bit? Because I think this is something that, in storytelling, right? While you're in the experience, shutting down is a survival mechanism. And now you are not shutting down at all. So can we talk about shutting down a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So do you want to talk about the shutting down as a coping mechanism in when you're in a state of crisis or that
Yeah,
kind of thing?
absolutely.
Well, that to me, that was one of the key from a psychological side in terms of the therapies, the therapists, what they have told me from a psychological side, that was one of the key attributes that kept me alive. In a situation, a violent situation, particularly with somebody who's mentally unwell, their mindset tends to be predator and you are the prey. And I learned early on that I was no physical match for him, and I somehow knew all I had was some to figure out something in my mind, and I found that he was less reactive to me when I showed no emotion. So initially, that's where my shutting down became as a default. And I went to a place where I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I didn't get angry. I was, the adaptability and compliance are all built in there too. But, I just became okay, I'm going to get through this somehow. And I had to go to a place of calm. So that's why I ask you to clarify, does this mean in just in the state of crisis?
Yeah.
Shutting down is a mechanism I think we can use in any situation to find the best solution for our situation. We have to go to a place of quiet. And that mindset has been reinforced to me, I guess, through the writing. And in a severe situation, it helped me get through it. And it's something that I certainly see as an attribute that I use in other stressful situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a strong one. It's one that, meditation teaches us, yoga teaches us, and it's all intertwined.
So when you talk about shutting down, you were talking about coming to that place inside of you where it's quiet rather than dissociating.
For me, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't necessarily, it's hard to say. I mean, it's like some psychologists might say, analyze me and say one thing. I don't feel I disassociated.
Yeah.
Because I always felt present. I still remember 32 years ago, those details are still pretty solid. So, yeah,
So it's about finding that quiet within.
yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. So let's talk about platform. Let's move away from all of that, the crime and the attributes. Let's talk about platform. So what role has podcasting played in building your platform, and how has it helped connect you with others who may need to hear your story?
Um, I never thought that I would be do something like this, and it was someone else, as I've mentioned, my mentor, who saw it in me to do. And yes, the way that helped in this day and age in building a platform is it put everyone has a story. I truly believe we all have great stories that told the right way are really great stories. And everyone can publish a book these days. So self-publishing is an amazing tool. And what that does though is it just saturates the market. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what I've learned through the Writers Festival per se is you need to have this there's a magic place of building a platform, and for me, it came in the form of the podcast, and at least organizing, if nothing else, my own thoughts and how to tell this story in a way that, as I have said before, isn't just this day by day, here's all the nitty-gritty details. Like, there's got to be a bigger takeaway from storytelling, because I think that's the power of storytelling, is we learn so much, even if we can't relate to the details. The impact or the lessons learned are what resonate with us.
Yeah. And I think now my audience is thinking, okay, how do I start a podcast? So, what advice would you give to authors who are thinking about launching a podcast to support their book?
I don't know if the world needs a whole bunch more podcasts. I am involved in a podcast community, and there are some very strong hosts out there that, rather than take on the task and be another teeny voice in a giant pool, it might be smarter to jump into those other established platforms and start telling your story that way. But each person has a strength, and not everybody sounds good when their voice is recorded, and not everybody production is another thing. If people don't like how it sounds, whether it's the production quality or what have you. So there's those. Don't just do it for that sake, because it's a lot of work for little reward. So networking and community, I would look at that piece before and see where your community is, and then those people will lead you to the right place.
Perfect. Thank you. So based on that, if somebody's listening in and they think, yeah, but how do I do that? What would be the first 3 steps that you might suggest they take?
For launching a podcast, or
For finding your place in the podcasting world rather than launching your own.
well, what was told to me is, it's always, start listening to what's out there and what voices you connect with. People are more accessible than you think. LinkedIn is an amazing community. You can reach out and talk to anyone, and there are and YouTube. There's just, through all the social media channels, try and narrow it down that way. Number one. In person, you can't say enough about the power of being in person, and I think we all learned that very strongly in the pandemic. So find a local community group within your network, your neighborhood. I know there's even libraries that have podcast meetup groups that are quite fantastic. But yeah, I can't say enough about the power of community, whether it be virtual or in person, but build it there. Number 1, 2, and 3,
Yes.
really. But your own skill set. Don't think you have to learn how to do it, right? So, and that's what I'm finding now. I have a couple of other survivors that have reached out to me of just other terrible things and said, I want to start a podcast. And we're now talking about them coming in as a voice within what I'm doing. So getting them started there, and don't feel you have to take it on all at once, I guess, is all
Yeah.
I'm trying to say. Because
Brilliant.
it's daunting enough to tell your story.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that. I think that
We're
was really
not
good.
natural marketers.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Finally, where can people connect with you, learn about your story, and follow your work?
I am most active on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then I also have the podcast Stand Up 8, which is on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. So yes,
Brilliant.
and it's just my name, but I do have. I'm building a community of resources to help people understand trauma, and that's my business stuff. So, but if you just search for my name, it's pretty findable.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Lenore, for coming. I really appreciate your time today, and how insightful you've been. You know, you hear a lot of people going, "Do this, do this, do this," and you've been a lot more thoughtful and understanding of everyone's in a different place, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, there's no 1, 2, 3 step to life,
True, true.
serendipity. This is
Exactly.
keywords,
Yeah.
serendipity.
Thank you, Lenore.
My pleasure. Okay.
Okay, if you are, thank you for joining us. If you're thinking about this, I really want to say that I hope this conversation has provided you with valuable insights to a path to telling your story to healing, whether you want to tell your story just for your own sake or whether you want to share it with the world. So remember to visit Author Nation online for any resources that you might need to help you do that. And I wanted you to know that I greatly appreciate your feedback and your support. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a comment or a review. And don't forget to share it with fellow authors who will benefit from the content. Your participation helps us continue delivering the insights and the tools you need to succeed. So keep writing, keep creating, and continue sharing your unique stories with the world.